Hi everyone, this is Jody Barrows with The Square and a Square, and I just wanted to do a quick video on cutting strips. It seems like every quilt that you make nowadays, you need strips to do so. And of course, with the Square and a Square system, we start out with a square in the middle and strips that we sew around it. Now, of course, the square in the middle actually comes from a strip. You're going to cut your strip, and then you're going to go in there and cross cut it into the squares that you need for the size required. But you're also going to need strips that you sew around it. Now, most all strips anymore are cut selvage no matter how you are piecing your quilt together. And so that's what we have done. The first thing you must do is you must press your fabric, and we'll talk about quality of fabrics, and we'll talk about pre-washing in another video. This one is just going to be on cutting. So the first thing you need to do is to press your fabric, make sure all the wrinkles are out. And this is probably the only time that I would use steam or starch. And most of the time I just use a best press or a best press formula of spray that I put on it. And actually best press is not a starch. It is a pressing moisture that you will put on your quilt, and it will help remove the wrinkles from the bolt, or if you have washed it from the washing, or maybe it's been kind of wadded up on the bolt and it has some really strong creases or folds in it. And that's what the best press is for, is to help get those deep wrinkles out. So after your fabric is pressed and it's all smooth, I generally cut 2 layers of fabric. So if you're cutting 2 layers of fabric, that means that you have 2, because it's folded, so you're going to have 2 layers here and 2 layers here. So that means that you have 4 levels or rows of fabric, because I have pressed my fabric, I folded it over. You can see my fold here. So I have 2 layers of fabric, meaning that I have 4 different levels of the fabric. Now, I don't recommend cutting more than 4 layers. If you cut more than 4 layers, then you will need to make sure that you have a brand new blade in your rotary cutter, and that's when I would recommend the bigger blade. This is kind of the medium-sized blade, and this one is the 45 millimeter. So if you're cutting 4 layers of fabric, this is a good one for it. Just remember 4 of the 45, 4 layers. Now, if you're just cutting 1 layer of the fabric, like when you're piecing or you're trimming up a square, or even when you're trimming the square in a square, the smaller one, which this one is the 28 millimeter, this one will work just fine. And a lot of times in my videos, I'm using the smaller one, and I will get an endless amount of questions as to why are you using the small rotary cutter. Well, if you're only cutting 1 or 2 layers, the 28 millimeter, see, 28, 2 layers or less, that's the one that you should use. It helps save your blade, and you really don't need any more than that. So I'm cutting 4 layers of fabric. I'm going to use my 45. I do think it's extremely important to make sure that you always have a nice blade in your rotary cutter. Now, for the quilt I'm making, I need strips that are 1 3/4 inches. Now, you always are supposed to do a cleanup cut. A cleanup cut means that you're going to come in here and get a nice edge or a nice even layer of 2 or 4 layers, however many layers of fabric that you have here. And then from that cleanup cut, you would put your ruler on there and measure off however much you need. Now, you can cut one section at a time. So if I need 1 3/4 inch, I can come in here just like this and cut 1 strip that is 1 3/4. But every time I cut, this line here starts to move a little bit to the left or the right. So it's really nice if you can come in here, and pretty soon you'll notice that you're off quite a bit of fabric, and you need to go back in and do a new cleanup cut to get it straightened up. So I like to cut more than that. I like to cut a section that's more than what I need. So my ruler is a 6-inch ruler, so I can't cut more than 6-inch segments. So what I have done is I've gone in and worked it out here on my piece of paper. So I know that if I cut a 1 3/4 and a 1 3/4, that's a 3 1/2. If I add 1 more to it, that's a 5 1/4. So that's what I want to do. I want to cut a section that's 5 1/4. And what this does is it allows me to keep this cleanup cut and the edges of my fabric more accurate, and even my strips will be more accurate, and I will not lose or waste little slivers of fabric from getting off going to the left or right. So I already have my cleanup cut, so I'm going to go in here and cut 5 1/4, and I know that I can get three sections out of here that are the 1 3/4. So this is my cleanup cut, and this is the edge I'm going to use for every cut, and therefore I know that it's going to stay straight longer. Now when you do your first cut to get your cleanup cut, make sure that you, I'm using the fold of the fabric. I've made sure that everything is very smooth and neat, and I just find the line on here that keeps it straight, and then I made my cleanup cut. So now going off of that cleanup cut, I'm going to come in here and cut my 5 1/4. Now notice how my hand only moves up just a little bit, and I only cut little, just a few inches of fabric at a time. And your hand must move up as you go. I see people lay on their fabric. I see people use a lip on their ruler. I see all kinds of things. But you really do need to be in control of that fabric underneath the ruler. Now, if I have a lip on my ruler, I have to put that lip here, and I spend a lot of time getting this all straight so that it would line up perfect with that lip. And that, to me, that's just a waste of time. Now see, that's probably when I stopped and I didn't apply enough pressure. So on this next one, I'm going to give you a tip on that, so that where you move these little, oh, there it is up there. Okay, because see, when you do this and you keep going, you should make your cut, back up just a little bit, make your cut, back up just a little bit, make your cut, and then you won't have those sections. So see, now I have moved my fabric because it wasn't cut there. So that's a good learning thing, because I could have gone ahead and used this edge for my next cut, but now I'll have to go in here and clean this up to get a more perfect edge. Now the strips that I'm cutting today are the strips that I'm going to use for a pineapple quilt. So I really need to make sure that these strips are as nice and neat and accurate as possible. If there's strips that you're using that you're sewing around your square and a square, if you're off just a little bit, that's not going to matter, because you're going to trim it up perfect with your square and a square ruler when you get done. So I have my 5 1/4, and I know from my paperwork that my next measurement needs to be 3 1/2. So if I come in here and measure 3 1/2 from this good cleanup cut here, making sure that it's all nice and straight. See how I'm using that same cut. I use this cut to cut this, and I'm going to use this same cut to cut my new one. So bringing it down to my 3 1/2 and lining it up perfect, I know I have my nice 1 3/4 here. So this was a good cut off of this. Now this is going to be a good cut off of this. It's going to be the same cut. And it's not going to start shifting to the left or the right. So move your hand back off just a little bit, go again, back off a little bit. And the farther you get away from your body, the more you can lose contact of that blade going right on with your mat. So I did a nice cut that time working that. I didn't have any edges that didn't cut. So that's 2 layers right there. So now I have that perfect 1 3/4. I have my perfect 3 1/2, and I'll come in here and do another 1 3/4. So you can see how off of this cleanup cut, I cut all my other sections, and it kept my strip straight. And see how that section was all perfect, and I didn't lose my nice edge. So this one here was one that I had already done. That was a 5 1/2. So let's go in here and repeat that. So if it was a 5 1/2, and it is, then my next cut is 3 1/2. And see how this new cut is going to be cut off of this one. So see how all of it stays nice and even then this one would be the 1 3/4. So I always go in and cut my bigger sections and then come back in and cut my smaller ones, and it will allow my strips to stay real nice and neat. So hopefully that has helped you learn about how to cut strips from your fabric.